Well, a warm welcome to this talk. Now, I want to remind ourselves, because I think most of us know about it already, this paper here by Stanley Milgram, Behavioural Study of Obedience. It's published in 1963. It runs to a mere 8 pages and is probably the most terrifying document in the history of psychology, and strangely prophetic in many ways, as we'll see if you stick around. So what we're going to do on this video is talk about this. Not so much the paper itself, but the implications for our current time, which are, well, when I started putting this together, I was actually quite taken aback by how many applications there are. This article describes a procedure for the study of destructive obedience, is what it's about. Now, this is Stanley Milgram's original publication. He actually did about 18 studies in this between 1961 and 1963. So this was the first one that's published, I believe. Work done in 1961 and published in 1963. And of course, I'll give you the links where you can download the whole thing for yourself. Completely readable, well worth it. And as you'll see, I've gone through, and even though I'm somewhat familiar with it, every time you read it, new things pop up that simply have to be underlined in red. So he did about 18 studies in this field. This was just the first one, the definitive one, really. But the others were largely consistent with this. There were variations on this. Participants were offered $4.50 to turn up to the laboratory, Yale University. And you probably know, but there was teachers and there was learners. So the subject would come in. There would be a random drawing of lots to decide who was the learner and who was the teacher. And of course, the subject always became the teacher because the learner was a stooge. The whole study was about studying the person that was described as the teacher to see how much they would obey. And of course, every time the supposed learner got something wrong, they got a electric shock administered by the fingers of the teacher. Now, the victim, in other words, the person that was supposed to be the learner, was a 47-year-old accountant who they met. And before Milgram studied how likely it was that people would electrocute someone they didn't know to death, he did a bit of a survey amongst his mates, who were psychology academics and professors, and they estimated that between 0 and 3% of people would give the final dose of the electric shock that could be terminal. But Milgram was studying why gas chambers were built, death camps were guarded, daily quotas of corpses were produced. Might have arisen in the mind of an individual, but they could only be carried out on a massive scale if very large numbers of persons obeyed the orders. That's what this is about. Partly inspired by the trial of Adolf Eichmann, who was in trial in Israel for genocide at this time. Now, they predicted 0 to 3%. Their average prediction was 1.2%. Now, that makes sense because that's consistent with the amount of psychopaths in the population. 1, 2, 3%, depends how you describe it. Because obviously only psychopaths would kill people. The actual number of ordinary citizens that were prepared to press the electric shock in the XXX range beyond the lethal range was 65% in this first round. So this suggests that 65% of us are quite capable of pressing that button for a lethal shot. 65% of us, does it mean that 65% of us could have worked in the gas chambers? I think that's what it does mean, because I think equivalent things are happening arguably all around the world today, including in our oh-so-civilised Western countries. Milgram's famous for his later work as well, 6 degrees of separation. That was Milgram's idea. And I didn't know this until I checked it out, but he also did correlation between watching television and antisocial behaviour. Talk about prophetic. A correlation between watching television and antisocial behaviour. Well done, Professor Milgram. Now, what do we learn from Milgram? This is what this is about. So it's not about the experiment so much itself. I am going to do some work on that, but this is about what we learn from Milgram. What do we learn from the fact that 65% of people, when set up pretending that they were studying learning, actually studying their obedience, would actually administer the lethal dose of the electric shock to a perfectly innocent person. 35% wouldn't, but 65% would. Well, what do we learn? Only bad people can do bad things. No, not true. Ordinary people can do bad things in the wrong context. Now, this partly frightens me because a lot of us are capable of murder, destructive behaviour and others. What's even more frightening is that I'm probably capable of it. Because in terms of probability, I would be in the 65%. Now, of course, this wouldn't work now because people know about Milgram. People know about this, but at the time, this was completely new. The subjects who were supposed to be the teachers giving the shocks did not know. And there's good evidence for why they believe this was a completely genuine thing to do. So only bad people do bad things? No. No. The other thing we learn is that we rationalise and diffuse responsibility. It's not my fault. It's that guy who gave me the orders. Anyway, I'm just a small cog in a big machine. I can't control the machine. I'm just doing a little bit. Not my fault, mate. Won't do, will it? Won't do. Individual moral accountability. It's the Nuremberg principle, but it's also an ancient Judeo-Christian principle as well, of course. Another thing we learn, I think, is to beware of gradual escalation. That small compromise at work, at home, business life, can lead to a slightly bigger compromise tomorrow or next week. We learn not to give moral compromise a foot in the door. Well, I'm not telling you what to do here. I'm just saying if you do compromise in a small way, tomorrow you may compromise in a big way. The choice is yours, of course. Milgram's machine had 30 graduated shocks, starting at 15 volts, going up to 450 volts. So they started off with just 15 volts. Not too bad. But of course, the next one was more. People will say, okay, you don't want to do that. Well, just do this little bit. And then if you do that little bit, they'll say, well, you did that little bit last week. What's the problem now? Do a little bit more. Make no mistake. Conscience can be blunted. Precedent can be set. I've experienced this in my working life. I'm sure many of you have as well. And people carried on electrocuting other people. People carried on with this destructive obedience, despite the fact that they didn't want to. Many of them were personally distressed. Milgram comments on a new phenomenon, hysterical laughter. So people were actually laughing out of sheer terror. They didn't want to carry on. Nervous tension was evident for many ways that are written up, and I'll show you some video of this maybe in the next video that illustrate this. But the people being experimented on, the teachers, remember the learner was a stooge, wasn't really being electrocuted. They really suffered during this, but 65% of them carried on to give the final 450 volt shock. A degree of empathy was possible, but overridden by conformity and obedience to orders. And interestingly, all of the teachers who were administering the shocks, which weren't really shocks, of course, had been given a 45 volt shock as a demo from the machine. Now, it wasn't really from the machine with all the gradated shocks on it. It was from a battery next door. But 45 volts can give you quite a kick. I talked to a mate of mine who's a telephone engineer, and he's frequently had shocks of this amount of voltage and said they really can be quite unpleasant, especially if you've got wet fingers. So quite a shock. So they knew what this was like. But yet they carried on due to such a key term, destructive obedience. Pressure of the situation. We learn not to let the pressure of people or a situation override our moral stance. We need to use our rational intellect to avoid confusion generated by others, because the situations that we're in life can be pressurized. We have to be aware that compromising our ethical position is quite possible. We also learn that authority can be wrong. The age of deference is over. Many of us now are contemptuous of authority. Authority can be wrong and is often wrong. So an establishment that was once good can turn bad. Maybe you can think of an establishment, heck, maybe you can think of a government or a nation that used to be good, but it's turned bad, turned destructive, that the obedience to that authority has become destructive. Power in institution or state can be weaponized against the individual. There is a risk that our state will weaponize the institutes of state against us as individual citizens, give us orders which are unethical to obey. This risk is there. This risk is there whether you work for a company, whether you work for a government, whether you work for a university. That risk is there. And no matter how apparently credible the source is, it can be wrong. So the person giving the orders here was in authority. They had credibility. They had the credibility of a prestigious university behind them. Academics, doctors, researchers can all be wrong. And I would say academics, doctors and researchers now are frequently wrong. Some academics, doctors and researchers can be bought. Bought. You don't need me to give you examples. An obedience to authority can override personal morality. We mustn't let it. Feel free to appeal to ultimate authority. Someone once said, do to others as you would have them do to you. Luke chapter 6, verse 13. We're answerable, I believe, to divine authority, not to some jumped up Tim Pot politician, scientist or doctor who struts around the world stage for 10 minutes before they die. Well, 100 years before they die, what difference does it make? Giving orders, expecting obedience. Sorry, the age of deference has passed. And then the people in the experiment were prodded, and the standard prods that were given, this was standardised. Prod 1, if someone was reluctant to execute their brother. Prod 1, please continue, or please go on. The next one, the experiment requires that you continue. Prod 3, it's absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. Prod 4, you must go on. Now, of course, we might not have been given orders using that precise phraseology, but these are the orders we're being given in so many words. Sometimes our orders are explicit, other times much more covert. There's a spirit abroad in my country at the moment where people know things they can say and what they can't say. We're self-censoring. Now, no politician will stand up and say, you know what, I've curtailed freedom of speech in the United Kingdom, or whichever country you're in. Of course not. It's not overt. It's not explicit. It's covert. And it's eroding things more than many of us would like to see. Next thing we can learn from Milgram, that which sounds credible is often not credible. Milgram's subjects were given apparently authoritative information on the relationship between learning and punishment. Kind of psychobabble, if you like, but things that made sense. Sounded credible. This is called sophistry, isn't it? Things are said that sound credible. Maybe this particular medical intervention will prevent transmission of a hideous disease. It sounds plausible, but is it true? Things that sound authoritative, things that sound reasonable, things that sound rational are often not, because people will manipulate half-truths, quarter-truths for their own ends. Sophistry. Sounds credible, but it's a load of poppycock. You could use a less polite term if you wanted to. And the other thing I think we learned from Milgram is we should challenge apparent axioms. Something that's taken as absolute. This has been done to me. It's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you. Look, someone's got to do it. This job's got to be done. If you don't do it, you're merely forcing someone else to do it. So do it. But no. To challenge the fundamental axiom is, you know what? I actually don't think that this job does have to be done. Who says it has to be done? This has to be done just because you say so. Someone has to do it because you say so. Who the heck are you? Challenge authority. Challenge apparent axioms, because things are put up as axioms, as firm conclusions, as the foundation stone of further learning and knowledge. They're just made up bunk sometimes. Where's your consideration? This has to be done. Do it or the next guy has to do it. No. Question it. Does it have to be done? Actually, maybe not. Maybe not. So what field are you in? Military? Justice? Education? Corporate world? Healthcare? The point of rupture is the act of disobedience. So think about how this applies to your field. So Milgram said that when the person starts to disobey, that is the point of rupture. Rupture is the first disobedience. And in this classical first serious study, no one disobeyed up until the 285 volt mark. 65% gave the final 450 volt lethal shock. 65% gave the final lethal shock. Now this was only on 40 subjects. 26 obeyed the orders of the experimenter till the end. Some expressed reluctance to administer shocks beyond 300 volt levels and displayed fear similar to those who defied the experimenter, yet they obeyed. The point of rupture often comes far too late. Maybe we should rupture at a much earlier stage. Look around, talk around. You'll find other people share your ethical position. You're probably not in an unacceptable minority. You're probably not in a hateful position. You're probably not a hateful person. Many of us ordinary people, I would hope, share your morality. The subjects were classified as defiant subjects who refused after 12 shocks, obedient subjects who administered all shock levels commanded. Take your pick. Do you want to be a defiant subject, do the right thing, or do you want to be an obedient subject and comply with destructive obedience? Now, Milgram's experimenters, of course, the people that were supposed to be the learners, were actually stooges. When they go, ow, they weren't really being electrocuted. When they were banging on the wall, they weren't really in distress. And at the end, they were brought through, introduced to the teacher, and they realised that they weren't really being electrocuted. The experiment was on them. So they went away without being distressed. Many people who did it, carried on with the shocks, were distressed but still did it. A few did it without batting an eyelid. Maybe they're the most frightening of all. Just went through all the shocks in a completely perfunctory way. So, I for sure knew about Milgram experiments during a psychology course in 1981, 1982. 81, I think it was. Pretty sure I knew in 81. And yet, I have failed to implement this in my life up until really quite recently. I still believed in those in authority to do the right thing. Now the age of deference is ended for me and for many of you. We're much more willing to question now, aren't we? Hopefully we're not taking part in antisocial behaviour through watching mainstream media. We may have failed in the past. Let's do better in the future. And the work of Stanley Milgram stands the test of time as a prophetic warning to our current age, in my view. Let me know what you think. I do plan on doing a bit more detail on this, but for now, let's leave Stanley Milgram there with our thanks. Stanley Milgram went on, he taught in New York for most of his life, I think. Left us at far too young an age. I think he was only 51 when he died, heart disease. But maybe in consistency with his prophetic life, he died in 1984.